train hissed like a tired animal as it slowed to a stop in the middle of nowhere. Dust rolling across the platform in waves, and Clara Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway of the passenger car, fingers clenched around the handle of a single worn leather suitcase, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the strangers below could hear it, because this was the moment her life split in two. Before and after the letter. Before and after the promise she had written in careful ink to a man she had never touched, and might never trust, a man who had paid her passage west with the simple expectation that she would become his wife. And as she stepped down onto the sun-scorched boards of Red Willow Station, she repeated the warning she had rehearsed for weeks, the sentence that had become her armor. Touch me and I'll leave no matter what. Because she had learned the cost of silence long before she ever boarded this train, learned it in a cramped Boston tenement where kindness always came with conditions and hands never asked permission, and now the West stretched out before her like a gamble she wasn't sure she could win, all dust and sky and distance, and there he was at the edge of the platform, leaning against a wooden post as if he had all the time in the world, the cowboy who had answered her ad, tall and broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, sunburned hands relaxed at his sides, not staring like the others but watching, her with a kind of still attention that made her chest tighten, because men either looked too much or not at all, and this one did neither, and when their eyes met he tipped his hat, not smiling, not smirking, just acknowledging her presence as if she were already someone to be respected, and that unsettled her more than rudeness ever could, because she had built her defenses for cruelty, not quiet decency, and when he spoke her name, Miss Whitmore, his voice was low and even, carrying over the wind without effort. She felt something dangerous stir in her, something like relief which she immediately crushed, because hope was a luxury she could not afford, not again, not after everything, and she corrected him quickly, voice sharp. I'll be Mrs. Caldwell only after. We're clear on terms, and she watched, carefully for offense, for anger, for that flash of wounded pride men carried like a weapon, but instead he nodded once, slow and deliberate, and said, That's fair. And fair was not a word she had heard often in the company of men, especially not men who believed a ring was a receipt, and as they walked toward the waiting wagon, the silence between them was thick but not hostile, filled instead with the creak of leather and the distant lowing of cattle, and she noticed things despite herself. The way he walked slightly ahead but not enough to leave her behind, the way he took her suitcase without brushing her fingers, the way he waited until she was seated before climbing up beside her, leaving a respectful space between them on the bench, and it was then, as the horses started forward and Red Willow shrank behind them, that she delivered her warning, the words she had practiced in the mirror, the words she had written and rewritten in her head until they felt like law. I need you to understand something before we go any further. I will be your wife in name and work, but not in body. Touch me even once without my consent and I will leave. I don't care how far, how poor, or how dangerous it is. I will leave. And she waited for the reaction she expected. The laugh, the insult, the threat, the reminder of money spent and expectations owed, but instead he pulled the reins gently, slowing the horses and turned to face her fully, not looming, not crowding, just meeting her eyes and said, Then I won't touch you, as if it were the simplest promise in the world. And something inside her cracked, not enough to break but enough to let doubt seep in, and she snapped back, You say that now, and he replied, I'll say it later too. And there was no bravado in it. No challenge, just certainty, and that scared her more than arrogance ever could, because certainty meant intention, and intention meant this man had already decided who he was going to be. And for the first time since she had mailed that letter, she wondered if she had underestimated him, and the land opened around them as they traveled. Flat and endless, the sky so wide it made her feel small, and when the ranch finally came into view, a modest house, weathered barn, fencing that needed mending, she felt disappointment and relief in equal measure, because this was not the empire she had feared being trapped in, but it was also not an easy life. And as the sun dipped low, painting everything in gold, he helped her down from the wagon again without touching her, and she felt the eyes of the ranch hands on her back, curiosity and speculation thick in the air, and she lifted her chin, because she had survived worse scrutiny than this. And inside the house he showed her to a small but clean bedroom, setting her suitcase down gently, and stepping back as if the threshold itself were a boundary he would not cross, and he said, Supper's at 6. You can join us or rest if you'd rather. And then he left, closing the door softly behind him. And Clara sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing, because this was not how it was supposed to go. Not how she had prepared, and that night at supper she watched him from across the table as he spoke with his hands and listened more than he talked, never once asserting ownership, never once correcting her. And when one of the hands joked crudely about finally having a woman in the house, Caldwell shut it down with a look so sharp the man muttered an apology, and Clara felt something twist painfully in her chest. Because protection was a language she did not trust, and later, when the house was quiet and the prairie wind rattled the windows, she lay awake waiting for footsteps that never came. And when morning arrived and days followed, she began to see the shape of the man she had married in ink but not yet in truth. A man who rose before dawn and worked until dark, who never raised his voice, who treated her warning not as a challenge but as a rule, and still she kept her distance, because she knew how easily kindness could turn into leverage. And when he finally did call her bluff, it was not with hands or words but with patience, because patience was its own kind of touch, one that reached places she had sworn no man would ever reach again. And as the weeks passed and the ranch became familiar, Clara realized the most dangerous thing about this cowboy was not that he might break his promise, but that he might keep it, and that possibility threatened everything she thought she knew about power, control, and survival. And as this chapter of her story closes, remember this if you're drawn into Clara and Caldwell's journey. The turning point came on a night when the sky split, open with thunder, and the horses bolted in panic, one slamming into the fence hard enough to snap a post. And Clara ran without thinking, skirt soaked, hair loose, fear driving her straight into the chaos. And when a frightened mare reared and nearly crushed her, it was Caldwell's arms that caught her firm and steady, pulling her out of harm's way before she even realized she had screamed. And for a single suspended breath, his hands were on her shoulders, solid and real, and the old terror flared. But so did something else, because he froze instantly, as if struck by lightning himself, releasing her at once and stepping back into the rain, voice rough with restraint as he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't think. Are you hurt?" And she shook her head, stunned because he had broken her rule to save her, and then punished himself harder than she ever could. And in that moment the truth hit her with the force of the storm. The danger was never his touch. It was her fear of trusting it. And as the rain soaked them both and the thunder rolled away, she closed the distance herself, placing her hand over his heart, feeling how fast it was beating, and she said quietly, "You called my bluff," and he swallowed, eyes dark, asking, "Do you want me to let go?" And for the first time in her life, the answer came without armor, without rehearsal, without fear, and she whispered, "No." And what followed was not possession or conquest but consent, slow and reverent, built on every promise he had kept when it would have been easier to break them. And Clara understood then that love was not taken. It was offered and accepted freely. And she stayed, not because she was trapped, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had found a man who proved that respect could be stronger than desire. And years later, when people asked how a mail-order bride came to love the cowboy she once warned, she would smile and say, "He listened." And if this story moved you, surprised you, or made